copies, and originals. The ancestors of the mysterious Akkadians, the Chandra or Indovanas, the lunar kings whom tradition shows reigning at Prayag, Allahabad, ages before our era, had come from India and brought with them the worship of their forefathers, of Soma and his son Buddha, which afterwards became that of the Chaldeans. Yet such adoration, apart from popular astrology and heliolatry, was in no sense idolatry, no more at any rate than the modern Roman Catholic symbolism, which connects their Virgin Mary, the Magna Mater of Syrians and the Greeks, with the moon. Of this worship, the most pious Roman Catholics feel quite proud and loudly confess to it. In a memoir to the French Academy, the Marquis de Merville says, quote, "It is only natural that as an unconscious prophecy, Amun-Ra should be his mother's husband, since the Magna Mater of Christians is precisely the spouse of that son that she conceives." End quote. We, Christians, can understand now why Neithus throws radiance on the sun while remaining the moon, since the all-caps virgin, who is the all-caps queen of heaven, as Neith was, clothes herself in her radiance, and clothes in his turn the all-caps Christ Son, quote, "Tu vestis solem et ti sol vestite," end quote, is sung by the Roman Catholics during their service, and then he adds, quote, "We Christians understand also how it is that the famous inscription at Sais should have stated that, quote, none has ever lifted my peplum, or, quote, veil, considering that this sentence, literally translated, is the summary of what is sung in the church on the day of the Immaculate Conception," end quote. See Archaeology of the Virgin Mother, page 117. Surely nothing could be more sincere than this. It justifies entirely what Mr. Gerald Massey has said in his lecture on Luniolatry, Ancient and Modern, end quote. And he quotes the following, quote, "The man in the moon, Osiris Sut, Jehovah Satan, Christ Judas, and other lunar twins, is often charged with bad conduct. In the lunar phenomenon, the moon was once as the moon, which was a twofold in sex and threefold in character, as mother, child, and adult male. Thus the child of the moon became the consort of his own mother. It could not be helped if there was to be any reproduction. He was compelled to be his own father. These relationships were repudiated by later sociology, and the primitive man in the moon got tabooed. Yet, in its latest and most inexplicable phase, this has become the central doctrine of the grossest superstition the world has seen. For these lunar phenomena and their humanly represented relationships, the incestuous ones included, are the very foundations of the Christian Trinity and unity. Through ignorance of the symbolism, the simple representation of early time has become the most profound religious mystery in modern luniolatry. The Roman Church, without being in any wise ashamed of the proof, portrays the Virgin Mary arrayed with the sun and the horned moon at her feet, holding the lunar infant in her arms as the child and the consort of the mother moon. The mother, child, and adult male, they are all fundamental." End quote. Quote, "In this way it can be proved that our Christology is mummified mythology and legendary lore, which have been palmed off upon us in the Old Testament and the New as a divine revelation uttered by the very voice of God." End quote. A charming allegory is found within the Zohar one which unveils better than anything ever did the true character of Jehovah, or Yahweh, in primitive conception of the Hebrew Kabbalists. It is now found in the philosophy of Ibn Gabriel's Kabbalah, translated by Isaac Meyer. They met a man with a heavy burden, and they asked his name, but he refused to give it, and proceeded to explain to them Torah, or the law. Quote, they asked, quote, "Who caused thee thus to walk and carry such a heavy load?" And he answered, "The letter Yod, which is 10, and is the symbolical letter of Kether, and the essence of the germ of the holy name, Yod-He Vod-He." They said to him, quote, "If thou wilt tell us the name of thy father, we will kiss the dust of thy feet." End quote. And he replied back, quote, "As to my father, he had his dwelling in the great sea, and was a fish therein, like Vishnu, or Dagon, or Oannes, which first destroyed the great sea." End quote. "And he was great and mighty, and, quote, ancient of days," end quote, "until he swallowed all the other fishes in the great sea." Our Eleazar listened and said to him, quote, "Thou art the son of the holy flame. Thou art the son of Rab Ham Nun-A Sabah the old. The fish in Aramaic, or Chaldee, is Nun. Thou art the son of the light of the Torah, or Dharma, etc." Then the author explains that the feminine Sephiroth, Bina, is termed by the Kabbalist the Great Sea. Therefore, Bina, whose divine name are Jehovah, Yah, and Elohim, is simply the Chaldean Tiamat, the female power. The Thathlaf of Berosus, who presides over the chaos, and was made out later by Christian theology to be that serpent and the devil. She, he, or Yah and Hova, is the supernal He and Eve. This Yah, Hova, then, or Jehovah, is identical with our chaos, the Father, Mother, Son, on the material plane and in the purely physical world. Demon and DEUS at this one and the same time, the sun and the moon, good as well as evil, God as well as demon. Lunar magnetism generates life, preserves, and destroys it, psychically as well as physically. And if astronomically she is one of the 7 planets of the ancient world, in theogony she is one of the regents thereof, with Christians now as much as with pagans, the former referring to her under the name of one of their archangels, and then the latter under that of one of their gods. Therefore the meaning of the, quote, fairy tale, end quote, translated by Twolson from the Old Chaldean, translated into Arabic, about Qutami being instructed by the idol of the moon, is then easily understood. Saldinus tells us the secret as well as Maimonides. The worshippers of the teraphim, or the Jewish oracles, quote, carved images and claimed that the light of the principal stars, or the planets, permeating through these and through the angelic virtues, or the regents of the stars and the planets, conversed with them, teaching them many most useful things and arts, end quote. Saldinus explains that the teraphim were built and composed after the position of certain planets, those which the Greeks called stoichia, and according to the figures which were located in the sky, which were called alexterio, and the tutelary gods. Those who traced out the stoichia, who were called, I can't pronounce that word, or basically diviners by the stoichia. Sorry for all of the mispronunciations. It is such sentences, however, in the quote, Nabatean agriculture, end quote, that have frightened the men of science and made them proclaim, quote, either an apocrypha or a fairy tale unworthy of the notice of academia, end quote. Solar lunar worship in the Church. At the same time as shown, zealous Roman Catholics and Protestants tore it metaphorically to pieces, the former because, quote, it described the worship of demons, end quote, and the latter because it is, quote, ungodly, end quote. They are all wrong, once more. It is not a fairy tale, and as far as regards pious churchmen, the same worship may be shown in the scriptures, however disfigured by translation. Solar and lunar worship, as well as that of the stars and the elements, are traced and figure in the Christian theology. Defended by papists, they are stoutly denied by the Protestants, only at their own risk and peril, and 2 instances may be there given. Ammianus Marcellinus teaches that the ancient divinations were always accomplished with the help of the spirits of the elements, quote, spiritus elementorum, end quote. But it is found now that the planets, the elements, and the zodiac were figured not only in Heliopolis by the 12 stones called, quote, mysteries of the elements, end quote, elementorum arcana, but also in Solomon's temple and, as pointed out by various writers, in several old Italian churches, and even at Notre Dame de Paris, where they can be seen to this day. The symbol, the sun included, was more complex in its manifold meanings than the lunar symbol. The sex was, of course, dual. With some, it was male, the Hindu, quote, King Soma, end quote, and the Chaldean, quote, Sin, end quote, and with other nations it was female, the beauteous goddess Diana Luna, Iletha Lucina. In Taurus, human victims were sacrificed to Artemis, a form of the lunar goddess. The Cretans called her Dictina, and the Medes and the Persians Anitis, as shown by an inscription of Koli, Artemidi Anaiti. But we are now concerned chiefly with the most chaste and the pure of the virgin goddesses, Luna Artemis, to whom Pampos was the first to give the surname Callisti, of whom Hippodamus wrote, this Artemis Lokia, the goddess that presided at conception and childbirth, Iliad, Pausanias, etc., etc., is in her functions, and as the triple Hecate, the Orphic deity, the predecessor of the god of the rabbins or the pre-Christian Kabbalists, and his lunar type. And the goddess Trimorphos was the personified symbol of the various and successive aspects represented of the moon in each of her 3 phases, and this interpretation was already that of the Stoics, while the Orpheans explained the epithet Trimorphos by the 3 kingdoms of nature over which she reigned: jealous, bloodthirsty, revengeful, and exacting. Hecate Luna is a worthy counterpart of the, quote, jealous god, end quote, of the Hebrew prophets. Reader's note, Exodus 20, verse 5, quote, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, I am a jealous God, end quote, end of reader's note. The whole riddle of the solar and lunar worship, as now traced in the churches, has indeed on this world-old mystery of lunar phenomena. The correlative forces in the, quote, Queen of Night, end quote, that lie latent for modern science, but are fully active to the knowledge of Eastern adepts, explain well the 1,001 images under which the moon was represented by the ancients. It also shows how much more profoundly learned in the Selenic mysteries were the ancients than are now modern astronomers. the whole pantheon of the lunar gods and goddesses, Nephites, Neith, Prospina, Melitia, Cybele, Isis, Astarte, Venus, and Hecate on the one hand, and Apollo, Dionysus, Adonais, Bacchus, Osiris, Attis, Tammuz, etc. on the other, all show on the face of their names and titles those of, quote, sons, end quote, and of, quote, husbands, end quote, of their own mothers, their identities shown with the Christian Trinity. In every religious system, the gods were made to merge their functions as father, son, and husband, all into one, and the goddesses were identified as, quote, wife, mother, and sister, end quote, of the male god, the former synthesizing the human attributes as the, quote, son, the giver of life, end quote, and the latter merging all the other titles in the grand synthesis known as Maya, Maria, Mer, etc., which is a generic name. In its forced derivation has come to mean with the Greeks, quote, mother, end quote, from the root ma, or nurse, and even gave its name to the month of May, which was sacred to all of those goddesses before it became consecrated to Mary. Footnote: the Roman Catholics are indebted for the idea of consecrating the month of May to the Virgin, to the pagan Plutarch, who shows that, quote, May is sacred to Maia, or Vesta, end quote, our Mother Earth, our nurse and nourisher personified, end of footnote. Its primitive meaning, however, was Maya, Durga, translated by the Orientalist as, quote, inaccessible, end quote, but meaning in truth the, quote, unreachable, end quote, in the sense of illusion and unreality, as being the source and cause of spells, the personification of, all caps, illusion. In religious rites, the moon served a dual purpose, personified as a female goddess for the exoteric purposes, or as a male god in allegory and symbol. In occult philosophy, our satellite was regarded as a sexless potency to be well studied because it was to be dreaded. Initiated Aryans, Chaldi, Greeks, and the Romans, Soma, Sin, Artemis Soteria, the hermaphrodite Apollo, whose attribute is the lyre, and the bearded Diana of bow and arrow, DEUS LUNUS, and especially Osiris Lunus and Thoth Lunus, were the occult potencies of the moon. Footnote: Thoth Lunus is, quote, Buddha Soma, end quote, of India, or, quote, Mercury and the moon, end quote, end of footnote. But whether male or female, whether Thoth or Minerva, Soma or Ashtoreth, the moon is the occult mystery of mysteries, and more a symbol of evil than that of good. Her 7 phases, original, esoteric division, are divided into 3 astronomical phenomena and 4 purely psychic phases. That the moon was not always reverenced is shown in the mystery, in which the death of the moon god, the 3 phases of gradual waning and final disappearance, was allegorized by the moon standing for genius of evil that triumphs for the time over the light and the life-giving god, the sun, and that all the skill and learning of the ancient hierophants in magic was required to turn this triumph into